The blueprint was a promise, a perfect, orderly future rendered in crisp blue lines and stark white paper. Elara Vance smoothed a hand over its surface, her fingers tracing the elegant arcs of the proposed pedestrian walkways, the precise rectangles of new retail spaces, and the bold, circular outline of the modern water feature that would be the town square's new centerpiece. From the window of her rented sedan, the reality of Pinebrook Square looked back at her, a messy, charming anachronism. It was a postcard from a bygone era. Cobblestones, worn smooth in the middle and treacherous in winter, formed the central plaza. Quaint, slightly crooked lampposts with fluted glass globes stood sentinel. A bronze statue of the town's founding lumberjack, axe perpetually raised, presided over a patch of grass that was more dirt than green. And at the far end, casting a long morning shadow that seemed to cling possessively to the entire space, stood a massive gnarled Norway spruce. It was the town Christmas tree, a plaque at its base declared, donated annually by the Evergreen Farm. Elara's lips tightened. Sentimentality. It was the enemy of progress, the anchor that held small towns like Pinebrook in the stagnant waters of the past. Her plan would liberate it. The spruce, of course, would have to go. Its root system was undoubtedly invasive, and its placement was directly where the new interactive water fountain was designed to be. She stepped out of the car, the chill mountain air a sharp contrast to the recycled warmth she'd been breathing for hours. She was a woman built of straight lines and sharp angles, a tailored wool coat, a severe black bob that ended precisely at her jawline, and a gaze that missed nothing. She looked at the square and saw not charm but inefficiency. Not history but hindrance. Her first stop was the mayor's office, a cozy room above the post office that smelled of old wood and anxiety. Mayor Higgins, a man whose roundness seemed a deliberate counterpoint to Elara's sharpness, greeted her with a damp handshake and a nervous smile. "Ms. Vance. Welcome, welcome. We're so excited about the grant. The Revitalization and Modernization Initiative. It sounds, well, revitalizing." He chuckled, a hollow sound. "It is, Mayor," Elara said, unrolling the blueprint on his desk. She launched into her presentation, her voice a calm, metronomic recitation of facts and figures. Increased foot traffic by an estimated 40%. A 25% projected rise in revenue for local businesses. Sustainable materials, LED lighting, Wi-Fi integration. "We'll be replacing these," she gestured vaguely towards the window, "hazardous cobblestones with heated, slip-resistant pavers." Mayor Higgins nodded, his eyes wide. "It sounds wonderful. Truly. There's just one small thing. The tree. The Norway spruce. Yes, it's noted in the environmental survey. Its removal is scheduled for Phase 1. We'll grind the stump and repurpose the wood for community art projects. A nice symbolic touch, I thought." The mayor's smile became pained. "The tree isn't just a tree, Ms. Vance. It's from the Evergreen Farm. The Henderson family. They've provided the town's Christmas tree for 70 years. It's a tradition. Traditions can be adapted," Elara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "Progress requires a certain flexibility. The new water feature will be a gathering place for all seasons, not just one holiday." Before the mayor could form a rebuttal, the office door swung open without a knock. A man filled the doorway not with bulk but with a solid, unyielding presence. He wore a worn flannel shirt and jeans stained with sap. His hair was a thick, unruly silver, and his face was a roadmap of lines carved by sun and wind. His eyes, a startlingly clear blue, went past the mayor and fixed directly on Elara and the blueprint on the desk. "Higgins," the man said, his voice a low rumble like distant thunder. "Heard the city slicker was in town. This her?" Mayor Higgins looked like a rabbit caught between two hawks. "Silas? Yes. Ms. Elara Vance, this is Silas Henderson, owner of Evergreen Farm." Silas Henderson didn't offer his hand. He walked to the desk and looked down at the blueprint. He was tall, and his shadow fell over Elara's perfect plan just as his tree's shadow fell over the square. He studied it for a long, silent moment. Elara watched him, noting the calloused fingers that hovered over the paper, the slight tightening of his jaw. "What's this circle?" he asked, though Elara was certain he already knew. "That is a state-of-the-art, recirculating water feature," she said, her voice cool. "It will provide a dynamic year-round focal point." "Dynamic," Silas repeated, the word tasting foreign in his mouth. He tapped the circle with a thick finger right on the spot where his tree stood. "You're putting a fancy puddle where our history is." "It's not a fancy puddle, Mr. Henderson. It's a symbol of Pinebrook's future. A future that is sustainable, accessible, and economically viable." Silas finally looked up from the blueprint and met her eyes. The intensity in his was a physical force. That tree was planted by my father the year I was born. I helped him nurture it. I've watched this town gather around it for 7 decades, for carols, for proposals, for remembering those we've lost. You can't put a price on that. You can't pave over it with your heated stones and Wi-Fi. The emotional value is noted, Elara said, though her tone suggested it had been noted and promptly filed away in a cabinet marked irrelevant. But the greater good of the entire town must take precedence. The grant is conditional on the full implementation of the plan. This, she tapped the blueprint, is the plan. Silas's face hardened into something as ancient and immovable as the mountains surrounding Pinebrook. We'll see about that. He turned and walked out, leaving a silence that was heavier than any argument. The war for the heart of Pinebrook had begun. The following week was a masterclass in bureaucratic friction. Elara set up a temporary office in a vacant room at the town hall, her laptop and architectural models creating a sterile island of modernity amidst the dusty files and framed historical photographs. She held a town meeting, presenting her sleek digital renderings to the residents of Pinebrook. She spoke of economic multipliers, of increased property values, of putting Pinebrook on the map. She showed them images of vibrant, modern plazas in Europe, of children laughing in fountains, of couples dining at chic outdoor cafes under elegant, new streetlights. The townsfolk listened, their faces a mosaic of skepticism and curiosity. When she finished, an elderly woman named Agnes, who ran the knitting store, stood up. "It's very shiny, dear," she said gently. "But where will we put the nativity scene? It always goes at the base of the tree." The new design includes a versatile staging area that can accommodate seasonal displays, Elara responded, her smile tight. A baker, flour still dusting his apron, asked, "The delivery trucks for my shop, your plan shows the access road is narrower. How will they turn?" "We've conducted traffic flow simulations. It's more than adequate." One by one, their concerns were met with data, with simulations, with the cold, hard logic of progress. And one by one, their hesitant interest waned, replaced by a quiet, unified resistance. They weren't arguing with her facts. They were defending a feeling, a rhythm of life she couldn't quantify. And always, in the back of the room or leaning against the doorframe, was Silas Henderson. He never spoke at the meetings. He didn't need to. His presence was a silent rallying point. He was the living embodiment of the tradition she was threatening. Frustrated, Elara decided to go to the source. She drove out of town, following a winding road that climbed into the hills. The air grew colder and cleaner, scented with the profound, resiny perfume of pine and fir. Evergreen Farm was not what she had expected. It wasn't a simple lot with rows of identical trees. It was a vast, rolling landscape of verdant hills, each dotted with trees of different sizes and species. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that unsettled her need for order. She found Silas not in a house, but in a large, open-sided barn, deftly operating a machine that baled young trees in burlap. He worked with a practiced, economical grace, his big hands gentle on the fragile saplings. He saw her but didn't stop, forcing her to approach him over the uneven, needle-strewn ground. "Mr. Henderson," she began, raising her voice over the machine's hum. He shut the machine off, and the sudden silence was deafening. "Come to serve the eviction notice?" he asked, wiping his hands on a rag. "I've come to see if we can find a compromise." "A compromise?" he echoed, as if the word were a foreign concept. "You mean you've come to see if I'll get out of your way?" Elara took a steadying breath. "The town square project is happening. The grant is secured. But perhaps we can relocate the tree. Plant a new one somewhere else in the square. A younger tree, one that better fits the new design." Silas looked at her, a long, measuring look that seemed to see right through her professional facade to the core of her ambition. "You don't understand, do you? It's not a tree. It's the tree. That specific tree. Its roots are in that specific soil. My father's hands packed the earth around its roots. My mother watered it. I've pruned it every year of my life. You can't relocate history, Miss Vance. You can only destroy it. With all due respect, Mr. Henderson, that's a deeply sentimental viewpoint. Pinebrook is struggling. Young people are leaving. Businesses are barely surviving. This project is a lifeline. And you think killing our traditions will make them stay?" He shook his head, a gesture of profound disappointment. "People don't put down roots for Wi-Fi. They put them down for community. For memory. For a tree that's been there their whole lives." He turned back to his baling machine, a clear dismissal. "There's no compromise to be had. You leave my tree be. Elara left the farm, the scent of pine clinging to her coat like a taunt. He was an obstinate, nostalgic old man, standing in the path of the future. And she was the force that would move him whether he liked it or not. The conflict became the town's bloodstream. It pulsed through the checkout line at the grocery store, echoed in the diner, and was debated in the town Facebook group. Progress versus tradition was the unofficial headline in the tiny Pinebrook Gazette. Elara, armed with the full weight of the law and the grant money, began Phase 1. Surveyors with tripods appeared on the square, their presence an affront to the casual, familiar geometry of the place. Orange fencing and caution tape went up, sectioning off areas for the initial utility work. She encountered problems that weren't in her project plan. Small, inexplicable problems. A surveyor's stake would be pulled up overnight. The lock on the temporary construction fence was jammed with sap. The town's only excavation contractor, a man named Bud who was Silas's fishing buddy, suddenly became unavailable for 2 weeks. Elara knew it wasn't Silas himself. The man was too proud for petty vandalism. But his influence was a vapor in the air, encouraging a passive-aggressive resistance from the very people who were supposed to be benefiting from her work. One afternoon, watching the stalled preparation work, she felt a presence beside her. It was a young woman, maybe in her late 20s, with Silas's clear blue eyes and a streak of green in her brown hair. "You must be Elara Vance," the woman said, her tone not unfriendly. "I'm Lily Henderson, Silas's daughter." Elara braced for another confrontation. "What can I do for you, Ms. Henderson?" "I run the farm shop in the Choose and Cut program," Lily said, nodding towards the square. "I also have a degree in graphic design. I moved back from the city 2 years ago." This surprised Elara. "Then you must see the potential here. The economic boost this project could bring to your business." "I see both sides," Lily said thoughtfully. "My dad, he's not just being stubborn. That tree is part of our family's story. It's his legacy. But this town, it does need new life. It can't just be a museum." She looked at Elara. "He won't listen to you. But he might listen to me if I had a real alternative to present. Something that doesn't feel like a surrender." It was the first crack of light Elara had seen. A potential ally within the fortress. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know yet," Lily admitted. "But relocate the tree is a non-starter. You have to understand what you're asking him to cut down isn't just wood. It's his past." Elara nodded slowly, a new strategy forming. Perhaps she had been approaching this wrong. She'd been trying to win a war of public opinion with data, when she needed to understand the heart of the enemy's defense. She needed to see the legend for herself. The annual Christmas tree lighting ceremony was, by all accounts, Pinebrook's premier event. Elara decided to attend. Not as a planner but as an observer. She needed to witness the tradition Silas was so determined to protect. As dusk fell, the square transformed. The crooked lampposts glowed with a soft, golden light. A light snow began to fall, dusting the cobblestones and the shoulders of the bronze lumberjack. The entire town seemed to be there, huddled in coats and scarves, holding steaming cups of cocoa. There was a palpable sense of anticipation, a collective warmth that defied the cold. A small choir began to sing, "O Christmas Tree," their voices harmonizing sweetly in the crisp air. And then, Silas Henderson, wearing a simple, clean work coat, stepped forward with the mayor. He was handed the ceremonial switch, an old-fashioned wooden lever connected to a generator. He didn't smile. He looked out at the crowd, at the faces of the children on their parents' shoulders, at the elderly couples holding hands. His gaze found Elara's for a moment, and she saw not defiance but a deep, solemn responsibility. He pulled the switch. Thousands of tiny, white fairy lights blazed to life in the dark branches of the Norway Spruce. It was a breathtaking transformation. The tree was no longer just a tree, it was a pillar of light, a constellation pulled down to earth. It illuminated the smiling, upturned faces, made the falling snow glitter like diamonds, and cast a magical, holy glow over the entire square. In that moment, Elara understood. This wasn't just a tradition, it was an act of communal magic. It was the soul of Pinebrook made visible. She felt a strange, hollow ache in her chest. Her water feature, with its choreographed jets and colored LEDs, suddenly seemed sterile and soulless in comparison. It was engineering. This was alchemy. Later, as the crowd began to disperse, she saw Silas standing alone, looking up at his tree. She approached him, her usual confidence replaced by an uncharacteristic uncertainty. "It's beautiful," she said, and the words felt inadequate. Silas glanced at her, his expression unreadable. It is, he said simply. I understand now, she continued, the admission costing her something. What it means to you. To everyone. Do you? He asked, his voice low. This tree saw this town through the war when we lit it for the boys overseas. It saw us through good times and bad. It's a constant. In a world that's changing too fast, people need constants. Elara was silent. She looked from the brilliantly lit tree to her rolled-up blueprint, which she had foolishly brought with her. The perfect circles and straight lines suddenly seemed arrogant, a child's drawing next to a masterpiece. A sudden sharp crack pierced the festive air. It was followed by a collective gasp from the few remaining people. High up on the tree, a major limb heavy with ice and age had splintered from the trunk. It swung down, a wrecking ball of wood and light, snagging power lines before crashing onto the cobblestones in a shower of sparks, shattered glass and broken branches. The lights on the tree flickered and died. Half the square was plunged into darkness. The magical pillar of light was now a wounded, dangerous giant, a limb torn from its body, live wires snaking across the stones. In the stunned silence, broken only by the fizzle of electricity, all eyes turned to Elara and Silas. The crisis was no longer about sentiment or progress. It was about safety, liability, and the brutal, undeniable fact that the great tree was, after all, just a tree. And it was broken. The aftermath was chaotic. The fire department arrived, cordoning off a wide area around the tree and the live wires. The power to the square was cut. The festive atmosphere had evaporated, replaced by a grim emergency. Mayor Higgins wrung his hands, looking from the damaged tree to Elara. Oh dear. This is terrible. Someone could have been hurt. Silas stood motionless, his face ashen in the flashing lights of the fire truck. He looked older, the lines on his face deeper, as if the fallen limb had been a part of himself. Elara's mind, however, had shifted into a different gear. Crisis management. This was a language she understood perfectly. She approached the fire chief. The structural integrity of the tree is compromised, she said, her voice calm and authoritative. The remaining limbs are a hazard, especially with the weight of this snow. The root system may be damaged, making the entire trunk unstable. The chief, a pragmatic man, nodded. She's right. We can't risk it. It'll have to come down. First thing in the morning. The words hung in the cold air. It'll have to come down. Elara had won. The tree was defeated not by her blueprints, but by its own mortality. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt a profound emptiness. She looked at Silas. He didn't argue. He just gave a single, slow nod, a king abdicating his throne, and turned to walk away, his shoulders slumped. The next morning, under a bleak, gray sky, a crew with chainsaws arrived. The town watched in a silent, mournful vigil. Elara stood at her office window watching the proceedings. She saw Lily Henderson approach her father, putting an arm around him. He didn't shrug it off. This was her moment. The path was clear. She could proceed with her original plan unopposed. But the vision of the tree lit up, the sound of the cracking limb, the look of utter defeat on Silas's face, it all replayed in her mind. She had wanted to modernize the square, but she hadn't wanted to break its heart. An idea, wild and unformed, began to flicker in the back of her mind. It was not in the blueprint. It broke a dozen of her own rules. It was messy, sentimental, and utterly irrational. She grabbed her coat and hurried out, heading not for the square but for her car. Elara drove to Evergreen Farm, the idea solidifying with every mile. She found Silas not in the barn, but in his farmhouse kitchen, sitting at a heavy wooden table with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. The house smelled of wood smoke and bacon. It was a home lived in and warm, a stark contrast to her own sterile apartment in the city. He looked up as she entered, his eyes wary. "I'm not here to gloat, Mr. Henderson," she said quickly. "Why are you here then?" His voice was flat, drained of its usual thunder. "The tree in the square, it's gone. It can't be saved." She paused, choosing her words with more care than she had ever used on any project proposal. "But the tradition doesn't have to be." Silas frowned. "What are you talking about? Your daughter told me you have a King's Grove. Trees that are never for sale. The best of the best." A flicker of interest crossed his face. My grandfather started it. One tree from every harvest season, planted special. They're my legacy trees." "Is there one?" Elara asked, her heart pounding. "That's the same age as the one in the square? Planted the year you were born?" Silas was silent for a long moment. "There is. My father planted its sibling in the square and one here in the grove. Said a town should have a heart, but its soul should stay on the farm. Elara leaned forward, her hands flat on the table. Then let's bring the soul to the heart. She began to lay out her new, unplanned, illogical idea. She described how they wouldn't just remove the old stump. They would extract it with care. They would prepare the soil not for a fountain but for a new tree. The tree from the King's Grove. They would replant it in a grand ceremony, not just as a replacement but as a renewal. My plan. It can be adapted, she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. The water feature can be shifted, redesigned to flow around the tree, to complement it. The pavers can be laid in a pattern that radiates from its base. We can use the wood from the fallen tree, not for trinkets but to build new benches, a new stage, a new nativity scene. We can weave the old tree's story into the new square. She looked at him, her professional composure completely gone, replaced by a raw, earnest passion he had never seen. It wouldn't be my square or your square. It would be Pinebrook Square. Truly. Silas studied her. He saw the city planner was gone, and in her place was just a woman who had finally seen the light. He slowly stood up and walked to the window, looking out towards the King's Grove. The tree in the grove, it's a fine tree. Strong. Better shaped than the one in the square ever was. He turned back to her, and for the first time, there was no hostility in his eyes, only a deep, considering gravity. It would be a lot of work. A delicate operation. I'll get the best arborists in the state, Elara said immediately. I'll redesign the plans myself. Tonight. A slow, grudging smile touched the corners of his mouth. You're a stubborn woman, Elara Vance. I've been called worse. He nodded once, a decision made. All right then. Let's go have a look at the grove. The following months were a whirlwind of collaborative effort. The change in the town was immediate and palpable. The moment it became known that Elara was saving the tradition, not destroying it, the resistance vanished, replaced by a surge of community spirit. Silas, working alongside Elara, was a revelation. He was still stubborn, still set in his ways, but his knowledge was immense and practical. He advised on soil composition, root ball size, and the best time of day for the transplant to minimize shock. Elara, in turn, managed the logistics, the budget reallocation, and the complex engineering of integrating the old plan with the new living centerpiece. They became an unlikely team. He learned the meaning of load-bearing capacity and permeable surfaces. She learned to distinguish a Fraser fir from a balsam and why a tree's north side often grew differently from its south. Lily Henderson became the project's graphic designer, creating beautiful renderings that showed the new hybrid square, the modern amenities seamlessly blending with the natural grandeur of the new old tree. The town was electrified. They were no longer being modernized, they were being evolved. The day of the replanting was an event even bigger than the Christmas lighting had been. A massive crane, operated by specialists Elara had hired, carefully lifted the magnificent new Norway spruce from the King's Grove and transported it through the town in a slow, ceremonial procession. Children waved and old men wiped their eyes. With painstaking care, it was lowered into the prepared hole in the square, right where its sibling had stood for 70 years. Silas and Elara stood side by side, shoveling the first scoops of earth around its base together. The new square, when it was finished, was more beautiful than anyone had imagined. The heated pavers were a light, earthy granite, laid in a pattern that swirled out from the tree like the rings of a trunk. The water feature was a gentle, curved stream that ran along one side, its sound a peaceful murmur that complemented, rather than competed with, the rustle of the pine needles. The benches and the new bandstand were crafted from the rich, golden wood of the fallen tree, each piece bearing a small, discreet plaque. From the original town tree 1952 to 2023. It was a perfect synthesis of memory and modernity. On the evening of the first Christmas after the transformation, the entire town gathered once more. The new tree, having taken to its new home with robust health, stood proud and tall. Mayor Higgins made a short speech, but everyone knew who the real heroes were. This square, the mayor said, shows us that progress doesn't have to erase the past. It can grow from it. My thanks to Silas Henderson for guarding our history, and to Elara Vance for helping us carry it into the future. He handed the ceremonial switch to both of them. Silas looked at Elara and gave a slight, respectful nod, yielding the honor to her. Elara, her heart full in a way she hadn't known was possible, pulled the switch. The tree erupted in light. It was the same magic, the same collective gasp, but it was also new. It was a promise kept, a wound healed, a future built not on the ashes of the past, but grafted onto its strongest, deepest roots. As the carols began, Elara stood back, watching the community she had once seen as an obstacle now laughing and celebrating in the space she had helped create. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Silas. "You did good, city planner," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We did good, tree farmer," she replied, smiling. She looked around the vibrant, glowing square, at the faces of the people, at the magnificent tree that was both ancient and new. Her blueprint was still there, in the stones and the stream, but it was no longer the whole story. The story was now written in the rings of a tree, and in the heart of a town that had learned to embrace both its roots and its branches.